Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am here to kind of go through a super quick step-by-step tutorial on how to use your camera in manual mode. This is going to be a little crazy. I already filmed it once but played it back and it wasn't great audio, so we're back. I shoot on two, so this is one 5D Mark IV, the other one is what I'm recording on right now. But when I first got this camera, it was kind of a fluke deal. My boyfriend surprised me one day with the camera of my dreams, and super duper thankful. But when I went to turn it on and start to use it, I realized it didn't have an auto mode or a portrait mode. It only had manual. It does have different modes on it for different things. However, I didn't know what I was doing, so I had to learn very quickly how to shoot in manual mode. So I'm here to try to help you learn as well, hopefully a little more gracefully than I did. I am a natural light wedding and lifestyle photographer. I do a ton of outdoor stuff, so a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be mostly relative to outdoor. However, more recently I have been doing a lot more indoor stuff, and I hate using flash. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. On a wedding day, obviously it's necessary, but for the most part I don't want to use a flash. So I try very hard to do as much as I can in camera with lighting and everything like that, so that I don't have to use artificial lighting if at all possible. When I talk to photographers who are just starting out or want to up their game or improve or learn, almost always they're wondering how to shoot in manual mode, or really how to get the full potential of their camera, and that's where I come in. So there are three pillars to shooting in manual that you really need to understand. They all work together in order to achieve really good in-camera photos, where you don't have to do a ton editing later. The three are your aperture, your ISO, and your shutter speed. Those three things are what going to be the main pillars to your photos and your sessions, and making sure that your lighting is good and that your raw files are immaculate. So I think that it's really important to understand that this isn't going to be something you learn overnight. It is a lot of trial and error. It is a lot of figuring out your camera. Not everybody has my camera, and everybody's camera is different. However, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed are the same. Different lenses have different aperture capabilities. So right now I'm filming on a Canon 35mm 1.4. So what that means is, and I'm actually filming at 1.4, which is my aperture, and what that means is that there is a ton of depth of field between me, what the camera is focused on, and my background. So everything behind me is going to look really blurry. That's on purpose. That's what a lot of photographers like to see in photos, and that's why the cameras that go down to 1.4 and 1.2 are more expensive. It's because the lower the aperture, most of the time, the more expensive the lens is going to be. I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure the Canon 50mm 1.2, which is this one that I have here, the 1.2 is the lowest aperture, I think, that they have ever. And even though 1.4 and 1.2 doesn't seem like a huge difference in aperture because it's 0.2, it really does make a huge difference. My 50mm, this one here, is so creamy and buttery, which sometimes can be bad. I hardly ever shoot at 1.2 because it's so hard to now focus on this thing in 1.2. But anyways, aperture is the depth of field, and it's going to be focusing what's in focus and what's more blurred out. So right now, like I said, you're focused here on me, my wall, that hat, my computer screen should be pretty blurred out. If you have your aperture all the way down at 1.4, for instance, your shutter speed can be a little bit higher because a lower aperture allows more light to come into your camera. So the lower the aperture, this gets so confusing, I don't know why they did this, don't ask me, but whoever made a camera, the lower the aperture, the bigger the hole is that's allowing light to get through into your camera. The higher the aperture, which the lens that I'm filming on right now goes up to an f/16, the higher the number, the smaller the hole is going to be. Totally doesn't make sense, I know. I don't know why they did that, but that's the truth. So if you have a super high aperture, your shutter might need to be a little bit slower because you're going to have less light coming into your camera, so on and so forth. So your aperture is going to be your first thing. If you're dealing with only shooting one person, if you're just focused on me, your aperture can be a little bit lower because the camera is going to have an easier time just picking up on my face. But if it were me and another person, you might need more or a higher aperture to make sure that we're both in focus. And then if you're doing a huge group family shot at a wedding, you're going to want an even higher aperture to make sure that when everybody's staggered, they're still in focus and you know, have a really good sharp photo for everybody. I think that weddings are normally the only time I up my aperture very much, like to maybe a 5, 4.5. The rest of the time I see between like a 1.4 and a 2.8. I went to Yosemite not too long ago and my aperture was a little bit higher, but that was because I really wanted to be able to show the background. We drove 4 hours to get to Yosemite and I was not going to drive 4 hours so that the background was all blurred out. I mean, I do think a blurry background is beautiful, especially when you have those like bokeh, really pretty round, or like when you're doing fairy lights, they're gorgeous. But in some circumstances, having a higher aperture works out better in your favor. The next one that we're going to focus on is the shutter speed. Your shutter speed is very self-explanatory. It's how fast your shutter is going. So if your number is a lot higher, the faster your shutter is going and the less light is coming in. And the lower your shutter speed is, the slower it's going and the more light it's allowing in. So that's why I said earlier, if your aperture is really high, you might want to lower your shutter speed to like compensate for that so that you have a well-lit photo and you're not super dark. And then if you have, let's say a super low aperture, then you can up your shutter speed a little bit to kind of balance that out. It's all a balance game, which is so crazy because I don't feel that people really understand that. I think they just think we pick up the camera and are like, okay, smile, you know, but the entire time I'm shooting, I'm constantly changing my settings to make sure that the back of, or the photo on the back of the camera, because they always display right here for me. I always want to be making sure that they look good, that the coloring's great, it's not too blown out in the highlights, as much as I can. You can only see so much on a tiny screen, but I try to always make sure that I've got everything like super duper good in camera. If anything, I tend to shoot a little bit darker in camera, just because I know that I can go back in and brighten it up. Whereas if you shoot too bright, sometimes it's harder to get those highlights back. So it's all a preference though, and completely up to you. I like to see the clouds in the sky, but some people don't. That's okay. Your shutter speed can also depend on what you have going on. If I'm just sitting here and I'm not like moving around a ton, you won't really need a super high shutter speed to take my picture. But if I'm sitting here and I'm, you know, bouncing back and forth or dancing, or say you have a couple and they're moving their nose and giggling, you're gonna want a little bit of a higher shutter speed to make sure that there's no motion blur, because that's what will happen if your shutter is too slow. While you're taking the picture, it captures it and there might be like a little bit of a blur with the subjects. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually kind of a cool thing and it looks really cool, but you don't really want that in all of your photos. So your shutter speed will also affect or change depending on what kind of shooting you're doing. If I'm taking just like a normal portrait, I can totally just, you know, sit here and then have a super low shutter speed and try to hold my hand still. And that'll still work, but you want to just be on the safe side. I pretty much keep my shutter speed between like 400 to 1,000 during like my sunset golden hour sessions, and then if it gets too dark, I'll bring it down, but I try really hard not to go below 200. That's like my cutoff point. if it gets too dark and I'm at my lowest aperture and my shutter speed is at 200 and I don't want to compromise by getting motion blur and like bringing it down anymore, then I'll bump up my third and final pillar, which is my ISO. ISO is, I don't actually know what it stands for. I should have Googled that. But I don't really think it matters. I just think of it as like an artificial lighting source. So what happens is your camera, and I'm going to actually show you guys this one because I feel like it makes it a little bit easier. If it's really dark outside and your shutter speed, like I said, is already at 200, okay, hopefully you can see that. So it's really dark and I don't have much light. If I bump my ISO, it brings everything that was dark back bright again. And then if I lower my ISO, it makes it darker. So it's pretty much just an artificial source of lighting in your camera. There is a downside, of course. I feel like there's always a downside. A ton of ISO does cause noise. I don't know the technical term, I'm pretty sure it's noise, but pretty much it's like a grain that gets added into your photo, but you don't have control over how heavy the grain is or how little the grain is. I usually add grain into my photos anyways. I really like the look of grain. I think it makes it look a little more dreamy and film-like and not super tack sharp and perfect. I'm not into perfect photos. Noise is something that you would think, since I like grain, I wouldn't care about. However, it drives me crazy because I don't have the control over it. I'm not able to really decide how much, little or a lot I want of it. So I try to avoid using my ISO at all costs. The only time I usually use it, of course, is on a wedding day. I take pictures during the wedding day in all different situations where I don't really have control of lighting most of the time. So I'll bump my ISO if I need to there. And then I also use it a lot during blue hour, so after the sun's gone down or partially gone down, after a golden hour session, I'll bump my ISO a little bit if I need to. Other than that though, I try to keep it at about 100, which is the lowest that it goes before auto, and I try to manipulate my aperture and my shutter speed before I have to touch my ISO at all. And that's just a preference too. A lot of people love ISO because they're able to keep a higher shutter speed. Everything is preferential. Everything's preferential. Is that a word? It all just depends on what you want to do. There's no right or wrong way, but there is a way that's going to work for you and that's not. So you go and figure it out. The fourth and final thing I really wanted to talk about was shooting in RAW. RAW is an actual file format, like JPEG or similar to JPEG. However, JPEG is a lot smaller of a format and RAW is a lot bigger. What happens is when you're shooting in JPEG, because it's such a small file, it doesn't write as much information onto your card. And then when you're editing and you're trying to bring back some of the highlights, or you're trying to, darken them up a lot, change colors a ton, you won't be able to manipulate the photo as much because it was shot in JPEG. Whereas if you're shooting in RAW, it shoots such a big file that you'll be able to go in there and really manipulate that photo a ton without it looking totally crazy. I don't really manipulate my photos a ton, but I think of shooting in RAW as like a backup to me if I don't have my settings correct. Like say I shoot way too dark, I'll be able to come in and like save the day and bring it, lighten it, make it save the day with that picture. Or if I'm shooting too bright, a lot of times I'll be able to darken it up and bring a lot of that information back as well. When I first started researching everything for shooting and with my new camera, one of the biggest things I read was shoot in RAW. Everybody said that, and so I just was kind of like, okay, I gotta do it, I guess. And I am so happy. I just feel like the quality of your image is going to be a little bit better. But that's, again, just a preference. Everybody is different, and that's okay. I really just wanted to make this video because I feel like for me, learning was hard. I didn't really have a ton of guidance, and I didn't really know a lot of people in the community either. And then as soon as I did find people in the community, they were always willing to help, and that's what I want to be for anybody, is just a guide or maybe a little bit of push in the right direction to start shooting in manual. Of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. I would love, love, love to help. Even though I have not been doing this long and I'm definitely not an expert, I do feel like I have some information that would be good to give. So I'm always interested in helping people. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. I would love to answer them. I am going to put some, I'm going to screen record a little bit, and I'm going to show you guys some examples of where I've been able to really save an image because I was shooting in RAW, and also I'll go over what my settings were on good images so that you can see kind of what I shoot at. Everybody's different, but for my own personal preference. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions at all, let me know and I would love to answer them. And please subscribe. You can also find my Instagram down in the link below. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, hi. So it's actually the next day. Hopefully you can't really tell, but that's better. So I wanted to go through and do some showing of what I was kind of talking about in the first portion of this video. This is one of my favorite examples of a photo that can be brought back. So when I originally shot this photo, I obviously, hopefully you can tell, I was going for a silhouette, and I actually edited it and used it as a silhouette. However, for the purpose of this video, I want to show the amount of information you can actually get back from a photo when you're shooting in RAW. So this one I was shooting at 1/160 for my shutter speed. My f-stop is f2.0, and then my ISO is at 160. Just so you know, if you press the I, when you're in Lightroom, if you press the I button, letter on your keyboard, you'll be able to see, oh, what did I just do? You'll be able to see some information about the photo. So anyways, oh, I pressed next. Well, that one would be a good one too, but we're going to use this one. So I would first go in and put my whatever edit or preset I wanted to use on it, but just because I want to show you guys, this is how much, so even before I press my exposure, if I up my shadows, up my highlights, bring my whites down and up my blacks, and then I pull up my exposure a little bit, you can tell that it went from quite literally no light on them at all to something, I mean, definitely isn't like the greatest photo in the world, which that's not really what I'm going for, but what I'm trying to show you is that if you're really in a hurry and you adjust your settings before you're really paying attention, but you just love the shot and you really have to use it, but it's a little too dark or too bright, it's definitely fixable when you're shooting in RAW. Whereas if this were a JPEG photo, it would be impossible, in my opinion, to try and save a photo like that. So just food for thought. I thought this would be kind of a cool photo to show because I think that that's a crazy difference before and after. I mean, and I didn't even touch the tone curve down here or anything. So food for thought. Okay, the other thing I wanted to show you is the difference in my settings based off of what environment I'm shooting in. So for instance, let's go. It was really, really cold when we were shooting these. It was really cold, super early in the morning, super blue. You can totally tell how blue these are, but up here again you can see my settings were 1/250, f1.4, and then my ISO was 500. The only reason I had an ISO that high was because it was still kind of dark. We didn't have any sun peeking over these mountains yet. And then if we scroll, you'll be able to see once we get into like these brighter images. I think that one's out of focus. Oh, love. My computer's lagging again. I don't know why. What the heck? Oh, I wonder if... Okay, so you can tell like here on this photo, my ISO was, or I'm sorry, my shutter speed was at 4,000, my aperture was at 1.6, and then my ISO was at 125. So you can tell here with the aperture aspect of it, I probably could have shot a little bit higher to get like a super duper duper sharp image of their faces. When the subject's like, she's a little bit behind him, so there might be a tiny bit of depth of field problem right there, but there wasn't, luckily. So I would just go in, edit it how I normally would. Maybe. I don't think my computer likes me to record. It's really weird. I have my mimosa at 5 o'clock at night. Yeah, so I'd pull this back, up my highlights a little bit, shadows a tiny bit, bring back those darks. It's a little too warm and too green for my liking. So before and after so far, but because I really want to see those mountains in the background, I'm going to take a brush and burn or darken all of this back here a little bit to try and bring back some detail, because again, because I'm shooting in RAW, I can do that. It's a little too dark right there. I like the whites better. Ooh. And then if you hold your cursor over this, it'll show, and as you can see, or also you can select it and then do show selected mask overlay. And then I'm on a Mac, so if I press option, I can go in and delete it off of their faces to ensure that I'm not getting any of the darkness on their face, because obviously we want them to be a little bit brighter, and I don't really want it down there either. And I also don't really love it on this tree a ton. So I'm going to just kind of feather that out a little bit. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the show, and then before and after. Oh, and I might need to warm it up a little bit. This isn't supposed to be an editing video, but I just kind of wanted to walk you guys through some things, mostly though showing you, so my shutter speed was a lot higher because it was a lot brighter outside. My aperture was able to come down a lot because I wasn't really super worried about the background. Then my ISO, usually keep it, like I said, between 100 and 160, depending. But yeah, wanted to really like be able to show you guys kind of my process of when I'm shooting. And that was only 2 examples, but yeah. Anyways, if you guys have any questions, I know I've already said this in the video like 100 times, but seriously, I would love to help you any way that I can. While we're all quarantined, I think it's really important to lift each other up, and this can be such a good time to where even if you've never touched a camera but you want to, or if you've only ever shot on auto or portrait mode or any of those things, now is the time to really like hone in. Take pictures of your dog, take pictures of yourself, take pictures of inanimate objects, just to see how those 3 things kind of work together. Sorry, I don't know why Siri just popped up. Shh. Sorry. Anyways, use this time, and I really hope this helped any of you guys, and if you would like, you can definitely like this video and subscribe. I'm going to be putting out more content on here. I absolutely loved doing this, so I want to try to help as much as I can. I think the next thing I'm going to try to teach is how I do multiple exposures in camera, so be on the lookout for that video. But thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys soon.